It's Success Happens on 930 WFMD, blending business and politics. Success Happens with your host, Jen Charlton.
Good morning and welcome to Success Happens. This is Jen Charlton, and I have with me today two extraordinary men who are steeped in the issues and opportunities of our great nation as discoverable in our founding documents. So we're going to talk today with Ken Davis, who was with us last week, and I thought it was so important, the discussion, that it was worthy of another show to really expand on the issues around constitutionality of things like, COVID, mask mandates, and vaccination passports. So we're going to get into that today. And I've invited back my dear old dad, Walter Charlton, who is also an attorney and has practiced law in the area for many decades and is very familiar with the deep state cabal type issues that, frankly, are facing us in a broader sense now. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring these two gentlemen together and have them have a conversation with you about their perspective on the issues that we face. So a reminder that Kennerly, otherwise known as Kennerly Davis, has authored the book Revolution, a call to turn back the lawless left and restore the promise of America. And I think, Ken, I'm enjoying reading your book very much, and I think it's written in a way that anybody can pick it up and really dig into it and benefit from your wisdom and your experience. But, one of the things I think about when we say the promise of America is that we forget the beginnings, the humble beginnings of our country that were based and born out of experiences that our founding fathers knew all too well about the risk of tyranny and suppression of the people. And here we are in a nation hundreds of years later dealing with tyranny and suppression and, being edited on our speaking, whether we hesitate in what we say because we're afraid of what others will think, so we don't have freedom of speech, or we're literally shut down by media outlets who refuse to honor our thoughts and our opinions and our speaking as valid. So we are in a cancel culture today that is rising up in contradiction to the Constitution. So I wanted to maybe set that in the background for us to then proceed in our conversation, really picking up where we left off last week. But Ken, would you share, first of all, why did you write this book, Revolution? And are you referring to a revolution now or revolution back then?
Well, Jen, first let me thank you very much for the opportunity to return to your very important show and spend some more time with you and today, your father, and all of your listeners. Well, I wrote the book because I think every one of us, every citizen in America has an obligation to do whatever he or she can whenever they can to preserve, protect, and defend the principles and institutions of our constitutional government. They're under attack, as you say, and in many unfortunate ways. We have come full circle. The founders were confronted with the abuses of consolidated authoritarian power in the crown. We are in the deep state. And so we have to deal with that. And in order to protect our future and preserve our liberty, we have to rekindle the spirit of the Constitution, the spirit of 76. And so I wrote the book to try to help people do that.
And I think it's important to note that when you say revolution, I don't think you're referring to, in terms of being full circle, literally a call to arms. It's more about a revolution against the ideas that we're facing that are contrary to our founding fathers' intent.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, the revolutionary thing we have to do is simply become reacquainted with the principles of the founding of this country and insist that our elected officials and our fellow citizens live by them.
Excellent. So I want to give Dad an opportunity to speak his thoughts about that.
Well, I want to say just one very simple thing. It was said to me by my daddy, who was a premier auditor in the District of Columbia. A premier, one of several. What Daddy said was this: when you have a complex, compound, screwed up situation, if the parties can agree upon the true facts, that is, if truth prevails, usually all problems dissolve, go away, disappear. And I think, after 30 years of fighting the deep state, that this is at least a very, very important cornerstone of the evil in the situation. When truth fails, nothing prevails except chaos.
Well, and I think you mean also, when we speak about truth, we often mean integrity. So it means really doing things the way they should be done, not cutting corners, not being self-interested, not doing things for yourself, your own benefit. And I think so often right now, the problem in politics and government is that people have become very self-interested. You know, they say that they're there to serve the people that they've been elected by, but in fact, they're worried more about getting what they want, looking good, getting reelected, and so forth. Dad?
Well, yes. Truth and integrity are a couplet. They go together. They're inseparable. And if integrity in a system, any system, fails, you have an out-of-balance engine. And what happens? It comes apart. Just like a overspeed steam engine.
I think we're there. I think we're coming apart at the seams. That's a good analogy, Dad. So Ken, when we look at, and we're going to have a break in just a moment, when we look at truing up to something we talked about last week, our values, our vision, and our mission as a nation, we look to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and our Bill of Rights. So how do you think, the first thing I want to set the tone for is we have some work to do as Americans, as participants in this great experiment. We must take responsibility for where we are no longer operating with integrity in relation to our founding documents and the things that say how we should operate. And I just have a concern that right now we're not doing that. And how do we get people to start really recognizing it? One thing you said, and I've said, is read the Constitution, read the Bill of Rights, read the Declaration of Independence. And, you know, it's out there. It's available readily. There's no excuse. And it's not hard. It's not hard reading. Just understand what those documents say, because they are our guiding light. What are your thoughts, Ken?
Well, I agree with all of that, and especially the need for people to really read and reread those two founding documents. But you can't have the limited government. You cannot enjoy the benefits and freedoms associated with the limited government established by the founders unless you have a self-limited people. Adams and all the other founders made it clear that civic virtue and personal integrity, humility, restraint, moderation, caring about your fellow citizen. All of that, what they called and we should call civic virtue, is an essential ingredient. They established a system of very limited government that was designed to set up the ground rules and let us pursue, as we wanted to pursue, in a responsible manner, our lives and our happiness, as we might define that. But you're quite right. Unfortunately, the American people generally are not nearly so humble, modest, self-restrained, and respectful of the inherited institutions as they should be.
Well, and I would say I might challenge that a little bit with all due respect, because I think that there's if you look at segments of the population, and, I'm in marketing, I'm always looking at segments, right? Demographics and whatnot. So if you look at, there's some people who are, we call them patriots, but I don't think that's a left-right thing anymore. I think there's people who are committed to this Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, and our founding documents, and they operate like that's really important. And then there's other people who've taken this Marxist kind of approach. They've been influenced by maybe the educational system, things they've read and seen, or frankly, group think that has taught them that somehow we're not getting it right. Our country is not what it's all that it's cracked up to be. So there's a group of folks who are really anti-American, in my view. So Dad has something he wants to say about that. So let me just offer this to him. Hold on.
Well, sticking with the analogy of the out-of-balance engine, for example, that's a physical principle. It's not a question of integrity. It's a question of physics. Now, when someone sets out to intentionally deep six the system, to blow the system up, to corrupt the system, to put false data before the courts, to propagandize instead of report facts, as our entire corrupt media has done, and has done for decades. And the courts are falling right on into the same trap, including the Supreme Court, which, as we now have demonstrated, doesn't even do its job anymore physically. They can't handle the cases, and when they handle them, they don't handle the tough stuff.
They opt out. They opt out. Yeah. So what I want to, we're coming up on a break, but I want to leave people with, what I hope to leave you with today, guys, is a roadmap. And I love what you said about civic virtue, Ken. The idea that people have the ability to turn the ship around, but it's going to require civic engagement, and not just from the radical left. People like you and me, we need to get engaged in a way that makes a difference. So the one thing is, first step on this roadmap to civic virtue is we can't be lazy. We got to read. And there's a principle that says for you to master something, you have to read it 3 times. Read it once through just to kind of get it, second time to understand it, third time to master it. So you have to be able to master the documents and really understand that which you are charged to understand as an American. Secondly, we have to get in action, and that means what are the things that we're passionate about, we're committed to, and we start vocalizing that to the people who, quote unquote, represent us. Okay, so that's food for thought. We're going to go to a quick break. I want to thank our sponsors. Sweeties on the Creek, we're scooping now. KW Photography and Design, that's Kira Wynn. She does a fabulous job with website design and other graphics. Wonderful photographer. And I also want to thank Dianovich and Associates, a great security company. We're going to take a quick break, and you're listening to 930 WFMD. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Success Happens. This is Jen, and I have with me today Ken Davis, otherwise known as Kennerly Davis. He's an author of Revolution, a great book that's available on Amazon.com. And then I have my father, Walter Charlton, who is admitted to the Supreme Court. He is an attorney in the federal circuit and so forth. And so he is bringing his experiences in dealing with constitutional issues. So we're really talking about that today. Ken, when we look at the idea of, we talked about getting into action. So we know we're going to read. We know that we're going to get in communication with people who so-called represent us in either the state, municipalities, counties, or federal. Any thoughts about that?
The steps that people can be reasonably expected to take are centered around their home, their neighborhood, their work groups, and their churches and things like that. So I saw in the book to in two different chapters to, number one, suggest some concrete, doable steps that would help reacquaint them and their family members and their friends and neighbors with the glorious story of America and the stunning, uplifting, uniting power of its founding principles. And those steps are, in addition to reading and downloading the important documents and noting the significant dates, the other activities involve a lot of things that I think, especially even if people have gotten out of the habit, that they will find very enjoyable. Visit historical sites. Take a road trip. Don't fly to the next coast for the next family vacation. Drive across this great and glorious country. And you'll find when you see the monuments, the homes, the historical markers, the battlefields, each encounter is not only enjoyable and entertaining, it leads to additional questions. And in becoming a better historically educated or re-educated American, you will become better able to defend the principles of the founding, and you'll be better able to defend your liberty. And it's fun. What a great and glorious history we have.
I love it. That's great. I'm getting ready to do a road trip, so that I'm really glad you said that. One thing I want to then step back and say, okay, one of the things that we've been faced with right now is history is under attack. And I find it kind of funny, actually. I mean, absurd funny, but a little bit humorous that people are attacking history like you can do something about it. History is. It just is. There's no, I guess you can throw interpretations and lenses and how you view history. But what happened is what happened. So this cancel culture notion of pulling down statues and look, all of it is what has made us here today. The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, the inspiring, the horrific, all of it has gotten us to this moment. So this notion of canceling history is absurd to me. But how did we get here? How did we degrade in our relationship to the Constitution, to our Declaration of Independence, so that tyranny or a certain body of people called the deep state in this today's world could now overshadow our individual rights? Because that's what's going on. We're going to talk about it in a minute, about the mask mandates and the passport to be, vaccinations, all of this. What do you say? How did we degrade to this point, Ken?
Well, Americans are a warm-hearted, tolerant, welcoming, trusting people. We are a great people. And part of that trust over the years has been to rely on our established institutions to do their job, to educate the next generation, to accurately report the news, to responsibly manage corporations and responsibly fulfill the obligations of elective and appointive office. And unfortunately, tragically, those institutions have largely betrayed that trust. We were talking earlier in the program about civic virtue, and you made the very important point that there are many, many people in this country who do understand what's at stake and do understand the value of our constitutional system and the glory of our history, and they are patriots, and therefore they embody to the fullest civic virtue. But those people are in short supply in the dominant, elitist, in quotes, institutions that define so much of our popular culture. Good people, American patriots and their families have been let down, betrayed by the people in charge of so many dominant institutions, media, so-called entertainment, so-called higher education, primary and secondary education. There's just a separation in this country. This is one of the big challenges we're facing, is that the understanding of the glory of this country is concentrated outside, in many cases, outside of the institutions that ought to be working full-time to protect and defend the institutions and nurture the next generation of patriots.
Well, one of the things I think that's important is that we've lost oversight. I'm going to let Dad talk about that when we come back from the break. But before we go to break, I think that you're pointing to something that when you look at the urban cities, talk about being let down by the very government that says it's committed to them. The urban cities have been in decline for years, and they are primarily Democrat run. So the promise, back to your quote in the title of the book, the promise of America at the level of municipality or urban city has been absolutely lost. And I think that President Trump showed that we could come back and save those urban cities, but we had to reorganize how we were serving them. So I wanted to make sure I said that because I think that has been a tremendous loss. I want to give Dad the opportunity. We've just got a minute before break, but you wanted to say something, Dad.
Yes. What I want to say is this. All of these highfalutin, fine ideas are great, but when somebody sets out to cheat and game the system and commit fraud on the magnitude of this election fraud, that is different. Goodwill and peaches and cream don't get it. You cannot have somebody set out to kill you or to destroy your system by cheating without strong action. And that is missing primarily, at least, from the Supreme Court, just to start off with.
And I think, and we'll have Dad share a little bit about his experience about that, and we've talked about it in the past, but we're going to go to news. But I think that there's no oversight. There's no integrity meter out there that says, whoa, you're off track. Let's bring it back. You know, and this whole function of auditing our integrity and our operations and our procedures and the way we do things that make sure that people aren't, I don't know, benefiting from their knowledge. I'm thinking about some of the politicians, frankly, on the left and the right, who have benefited financially from information they've been privy to because of where they sit. And then they go into the stock market and they do what they do. So there's all sorts of places where integrity is lacking in our systems, and there's no oversight to ensure that we bring it back in. Welcome back to Success Happens. This is Jen, and I have with me today Ken Davis, and I have also sitting with me Walter Charlton, my father, and an attorney as well. So both of you have tremendous passion about the Constitution. So back to you, Ken. Given, what we've been talking about, what are your thoughts in terms of how we go about restoring integrity and commitment and conviction to our Constitution? What can we do as a nation in our government structures? What needs to be fixed?
Well, as we have been discussing, the Constitution is an institutional arrangement designed to protect the natural rights of the citizen. That's the clear, explicit purpose of the Constitution. It's evident in its structure. Architects say form follows function, and the function of the Constitution is to protect our natural rights, and that explains its structure. And so to reinvigorate the structure, we have to re-educate the people, a sufficient number of the people, to insist that the institution be run in accordance with the principles. It's not now. I agree with your father. The Supreme Court, for significant example, has failed and failed and failed again to fulfill its responsibility to really call out repeated acts of lawlessness and unconstitutional behavior on the part of elected officials, legislators, and private parties.
And I would add to that, Ken, treasonous acts. I mean, clearly there have been treasonous acts.
Well, the act of treason or the crime of treason, like any crime, has its elements, and you have to prove those and by providing the evidence that supports each element of the crime. But we don't even get there because repeatedly the court punts in significant social issues, in election fraud appeals, in the interpretation of the Affordable Care Act in the past. The court too often takes the progressive path. I mean, the heart of progressive jurisprudence is to interpret the Constitution in any way that's needed to advance the progressive policy agenda and suppress the conservative agenda. Judges are not doing their duty when they take that path. Their job under the Constitution is to follow the Constitution and the text of the laws that have been passed by Congress and apply them to the facts and let the chips fall where they may.
Rather than legislate, as they say, from the bench. Let me give Dad an opportunity, and then I want to move on to the mandates and our lack of rights today. Go ahead.
Yes, and this corruption knows no bounds. It's not Democrats or Republicans. It's crooks versus honest people, and it's way, way out of control, and it can be fixed. It can be fixed, but not...
How would you do that?
Well, to start off with, you got to put the oversight back in with teeth. You got to have an FBI and a general accounting office that do their jobs and investigate, and particularly where the media is just another one of the crooks. Somebody's got to be calling the shots as to what's false and what isn't. And you certainly can't leave it up to the judges, because most of them don't know how to investigate. That's not their job. They're supposed to decide. And when the FBI cheats and the Department of Justice cheats and the Solicitor General's office cheats and feeds false information to the Supreme Court, what do you expect?
Well, and I will also say that the IG offices in many of these government agencies, although they are supposed to provide that oversight, are often also politicized. So you just don't get an honest, non-political view anymore. And there's got to be some sort of an ethics hierarchy that supersedes all of this. And I don't know what that looks like. But I want to move on to COVID, because I have said, just to remind people, you can go back and hear it on my shows back in April, May last year. I said, reopen Maryland. I was about it back in May. I knew something wasn't right on all this. And then we learned about this PIC data, and the PIC data was wrong. And they had collided all of these different data points to drive a narrative, right around the primary season, coincidentally. And just recently, the gal came out saying, well, they had mixed messages. That was the problem with COVID. No, they lied. They lied in those mixed messages. What they did is tell untruths, and it drove fear of God in people. And so it's just totally irresponsible. But I want to go back to this idea now of stripping Marylanders, stripping Americans of our rights around masking children. That's a huge thing right now. Unmask our children. Let's stop having them breathe their own carbon dioxide. Let's have them have fresh air and access to smiles and joy again, instead of hidden behind a mask. Let's help our elderly be able to be out and if they choose. How do we get this back on track in terms of personal rights and responsibility of government to get out of our way, not influence us with their opinion of what's best for us? Where do we stop this nonsense about the greater good and get our rights back?
Well, let me say that, like you're running a business, we've said that the country is a business and the Constitution is its charter. When you run a business, you have a problem. The most important thing is to correctly analyze the problem, what went wrong and why. And so when you think about lessons from the pandemic, I think one of the most important lessons is a reminder, and people should realize this, how vitally important our federalist structure, our structure of federalism to the preservation of our freedom and well-being. The great thing about the Constitution is in its structure, it enumerates only certain limited powers for the central government, and it reserves the rest to the states and the citizens of the states.
Well, let me point to something. I think that's really critical that we've lost sight of, because we've given the Fed way too much power. And the point of it being centralized in the state and the municipalities is to give the power to the people. When you take it away from them and you federalize everything, you've stripped people of having a say. I mean, I can pick up the phone and get a hold of any of the delegates or senators here. I can go to a hearing at the county seat and speak directly to my representatives and the county executive. But when you take all that power away from the local, state, and county and municipalities and you throw it up to the Fed, we lose control. And that's where I think we are. So back to what you're saying is it was not intended for the Fed to have this kind of power.
No, and the result of the structure is that the primary responsibility formally in state constitutions, state laws, and federal law, the primary responsibility is still formally placed when we're talking about matters of public health and safety at the state level. I mean, I don't think the state of Virginia has done a good job balancing our freedoms and public health concerns, and perhaps Maryland hasn't either.
No, we're right in that with you. It's been terrible. It's been way overreach in terms of, let me just say it from this perspective. The governor said what he said. He relinquished power and control to the county executives, who totally abused it. And there's a case here which I've covered where we had to go out and fight for the restaurants and frankly fight for the group fitness gyms and businesses, or we would have been out of business. So we had to fight these people because he had kicked that can down to county executives, and then politics prevailed because what they wanted to do was shut down the government, shut down the economy so that Trump would lose. I mean, it was just so predictable. It was ridiculous.
Well, that was a big part of I'll say, hyping the pandemic, inflating the fatality rates and everything else, all the hysterical, irresponsible news coverage of it was designed in large part by a lot of the media and blue state and Democrat political people and the deep state people in the bureaucracies to take down the president. But because public health is still largely the responsibility of the states, you did have, and how fortunate we are to have had much more promising, hopeful, balanced, liberty-loving, sensible responses to the pandemic in other states like Texas and South Dakota and Wyoming, not surprisingly, the red states and Florida. And, of course, what happened in all those instances? Those state leaders were denounced in the national dialogue as irresponsible super spreaders and the rest. But that's one thing we should be, I'll say, aware of and thankful for, is the fact that the police powers, including the mandates that can be formally issued in response to a public health crisis, are largely still a state responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean all states have done a good job, and I think one of the things that really needs to be done, certainly in places like Virginia and New York, if anybody's willing to do it, is to reexamine, revise, and limit the emergency powers of the governor.
That's in process here in Maryland. I know that there is a group, because I'm familiar with the leadership of that group, and I've been involved in a couple calls where they are absolutely going after adjusting the state constitution to reflect those changes so that an emergency mandate, and we can talk about that for a second, but is not a total power grab. This emergency mandate also, this is the mistake that county executive made. You don't schedule out an emergency. An emergency means it's urgent, it's critical, it's a crisis right now. It's not something you plan out a week in advance. So they defied the very logic and definition of emergency in a lot of cases. But I also think there's been an epiphany about this whole overreach. And I think that people left, right, and middle are seeing it. I really do.
Well, I think so. Now, and therefore, the next election or elections in each jurisdiction, in each state, will be an opportunity for people to to press the candidates and hold them responsible for fulfillment of a proper response to these lessons learned. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, these emergency statutes giving the governor the power to do this and do that, they were all written with short, acute, sharp, limited time frame events in mind. Tornadoes, terrorist bomb, hurricanes, or something like this. And here in Virginia, 14 months or more in it, we've got the governor fine-tuning and tweaking his directives for how many people can gather on Easter, how many feet apart, and whether they should be masked indoors, upwind, downwind. It's just intolerable.
And so we're going to come back from the break and talk about those specific things. Dad has a final comment before we go out.
Yeah, and all of this is subject to the fact that the crooks have got their foot on our carotid arteries with this election jiggling. That's got to get fixed first.
Well, we have to be willing to acknowledge, first of all, that it was indeed stolen, and there's still too many people who are either ignorant or unwilling because they have some political priority, or I'll say political, political agenda. So I want to just, before we go out, I just want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Sweeties on the Creek, We're Scooping Now, and Kira Wynn, photographer and graphic designer. She's phenomenal. And Dianovich and Associates. We're going to go to a quick break. We'll be right back on Free Talk 930 WFMD. Okay, welcome back to Success Happens. This is Jen. I have with me today Ken Davis and Walter Charlton. And I'd like to just dig into this, and we only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. But I want to talk about the mask mandates. And back to your point before the break, you said, all the things that they're imposing on us, but also where are they allowed to limit our ability to practice our faith? Where are they allowed? California, that guy was out of control. He's going to be tossed. He's out of there. They've already got more than 2 million people. They've met their quota to get him out of there. So, that's in the works. And I think Cuomo's next. So these, back to your point where the Republican states demonstrated it could be done well. There was no dramatic difference in the data, and therefore, it was good that they did that because we could show the lies on the left in these Democrat states where they've politically utilized public health. They politicize public health. It's so egregious, I can't hardly stomach it. So I want to ask you about mask mandates and this notion of vaccination passports. I think that we have got to put the kibosh on that. They do not have a right to mandate us to take a vaccine. My health, my body, my health. Enough. What do we do?
Well, both the discussion of mask mandates and especially at the national level and vaccination mandates, the discussion really does and should raise red flags. Now, always remembering that the public health powers reside mostly in the states. There have been cases, disputes over the years about the extent to which a state-level authority can mandate, say, vaccination. And in 1905, I think the case was Jacobson versus Massachusetts. The Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, found that Massachusetts could require people in Massachusetts to get smallpox vaccinations. But the standard there, whether it's a good or bad outcome, the standard in all these cases is that the police powers of the state and their public health measurements, mandates that they come forth with, have to be looked at in light of the constitutional rights of individual citizens in the Constitution, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, all the rights in the Bill of Rights. And so that's what courts do. And they make a determination in each case whether or not the public health restriction, requirement, and the rest was reasonable and proportional to the situation. At least that's what they're supposed to do. Now, the challenge we have now is that you have, when a case works its way to a court, you have the whole progressive left hive buzzing about what's reasonable. It's only reasonable to have mandates and so forth. But those are the standards, and we have to be ever vigilant in protecting us. And certainly when there's talk about the national government doing such things.
Well, I want to say this. You know, you cannot live in hypocrisy. It just doesn't fly anymore. So, first of all, this idea that on the federal level, so we have something called Roe v. Wade, okay? And they said that a woman has a right to choose because she's in charge of her health and her body. And in that case, a woman can end a life. So it's pretty serious. I would say far more serious than this notion of you have to take a vaccine because you might get sick. Way different. But here we are where the Fed is, well, to your point, it's a state-run public health system that we're in. So they have the right now to impose vaccines. Now, the Fed may do it. The Commerce may do it. We have to look at, right, who's going to have the power to say you can't travel on an airplane unless you have a passport that says you're vaccinated.
Right.
So my thought is there's a dichotomy here where, on one hand, my health, my choice, my body. On the other hand, do as you're told, or else. We're going to fine you $500, $5,000. We're going to shut down your business. We're going to disgrace you publicly. It's outrageous.
Well,
and we need to fight this because this is a direct violation, in my view, of our constitutional rights.
Well, it is, or it would be if they tried. As you point out, the limited or supposedly limited authority in the health area of the national government has to do with interstate commerce and international travel, and certainly not things like domestic passports for domestic travel. But they will always, because authoritarians, whether they were kings in the 15th century or progressive technocrats in the 21st century, they will always be looking for an opportunity to extend and expand their power and suppress the people who might resist them. And so we have to be constantly complaining, arguing, and pushing back, and not being the passive flock of sheep that they hope we are.
Well, on that note, we're at the top of the show, and I'm so delighted to have Ken Davis with us. He wrote the book Revolution, A Call to Turn Back the Lawless Left and Restore the Promise of America. You can find his book under Kennerly Davis on Amazon.com. I'd like to thank my dad for being with us. And I want to remind us that we have a voice. We have to be willing to use it. And the arrogance of the people in power needs, to your point, be pushed against. And, Dad, do you have a final word?
Yes, the arrogance and dishonesty of the people in power needs fixing. And we need to have a mechanism to fix it. Now, when the fixed mechanism is broken, we got a serious problem.
And there you have it. So you've been listening to Success Happens. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Sweeties on the Creek, KW Photography and Design, Dianovich and Associates. And we will see you next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. for another great show on Success Happens on Free Talk 930 WFMD.
Radio 930 WFMD Frederick.